And welcome back, everyone. We have a fantastic grad clinic lined up for you today. I've really been excited about this session because we're going to be covering two of the most important things that you need to do to be successful as a grad. We're going to cover getting your research proposal right. And really pleased that we've got Sonia. She's here in the studio with us. Sent her draft of research proposal. We're actually going to not just talk in general principles about what you need to do to get your research proposal right. We're going to work on a research proposal together to make sure that you know exactly what you need to do to, using that American phrase, hit it out of the park, to do a fantastic research proposal that really is going to knock the socks off your potential supervisors. We're also going to look at a literature review. And really, a lot of students get lost in doing their literature review for their thesis. As you know, that at Fast Track, we really strongly advocate for most students doing a systematic literature review. Again, there are exceptions, but we really like the systematic approach. Some of you may choose not to do that, and the case that we're going to look at from a submission from a student who's looking at African governance around epidemics. It's going to be a really nice one to look at because she's not taking a systematic approach, but we're still going to bring over some core principles, borrowing on what we've covered in our systematic review series, some core principles about what you need to do an excellent literature review and not get lost. Because that's one of the biggest challenges I see students have is they just have papers everywhere or PDFs of their papers everywhere, and they just go in circles and can't seem to get past the beginning. So really excited about these because literature review, research proposal, they really are kind of at the heart of what Fast Track Grad is all about. I created this community to provide a critical base of support where you can get direct support and feedback from real professors who have had real success in their careers and want to give back to students. And I created this because this is a support that I wanted my own grad students to have, and I wish I would have had when I was a grad. It would have helped me avoid so many of the most common pitfalls that I see graduates so commonly stumbling into. And some of those are around mindset, overcoming feelings of inadequacy and not being confident that causes you to miss out on opportunities and not get the support, input, and investment that you deserve and you need to thrive. And it's also around writing, some of these basic skills that we just don't teach in universities. And so really glad I know we have a lot of new members in this community. I look forward to getting to know each of you and connecting you to the right resources that you're going to find personally helpful in your graduate journey as you thrive. So do get in touch with myself. Do get in touch with Courtney and some of the other professors in the community, as well as our really helpful assistant, Christine, who some of you may have already been in touch with. If you haven't gotten a message from us, check your spam filter. Sometimes just feature Facebook, those of you in the group that get lost there. And by the way, just a reminder, do join our Facebook group. We have a lot of people joining from LinkedIn, YouTube, other platforms. This is really where we can directly communicate and we can get you that closer one-to-one support that's going to help you thrive. Okay, and as ever, if we have a little bit of time afterwards, we can go into some other questions. But again, we do this every Friday and open for submissions. And so if you want to get support and roll up our sleeves and work together on what you've been finding challenging, this is just our open access platform to do that. So with that, I'm going to dive in and I'm going to share my screen. You can see I'm out of the office today. So hopefully all goes smoothly. I'm on the travel laptop. And we are going to come straight to our first submission. So here we go. And I'll give you some nice background to kind of help make everything clear, hopefully. If you guys, I've run into some problems on the travel laptop before with the screen sharing. So if you can't see it, yell at me, make a note, get my attention here in the comments. And guys, remember, if you like what you're seeing or you have questions about what you're seeing, a lot of people watch on the replay. I always come back to the questions that you have, especially as some of you might be facing these challenges. Do let me know. So I think you can see this. I'm going to zoom in to make this clearer. So outline for literature review. Now, the student, and sorry if I'm getting it wrong, I think Sebi, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Thanks so much for sharing this with me because you're really putting yourself out there to get that feedback. And for a lot of students, all right, when you get feedback from a professor, it can sometimes feel like you're getting attacked. I remember the first paper I submitted for peer review. I felt like I was have arrows slung at me, And our natural reaction is to kind of get our backs up and be like, hang on, no, that's not right, and go on the defensive. Instead, so I see my role to be fierce, but also loving, to really try to constructively build up the areas that might be a little weak. And might have been the things that I diagnosed that could be causing you trouble. And Sebi shared with us that she's really been going in circles and can't seem to find a way forward in her literature review. And the title here is Governing African Cities, Entanglements, Code, Epidemics, and Crisis. And what she's got so far, which is very good, is Sebi, before going on and writing, she already did something really good, is trying to find structure. It is absolutely essential. Many of you have done assignments before leading up to grad school, but the very first and foremost thing you need to get right in writing your literature review is to have a structure. And so Sebi has been doing this, and even this in finding the structure is getting lost. And so I'm going to zoom out and zoom back in so you can kind of get a macro view of where things are at. And kind of where things are going is there's an introduction into entanglements and the speculative boundaries of governance, decoding African governance and its implications for African urbanism, locating traditional authorities in African cities, surfacing the foundations of bricolage, public health in cities, epidemics at city level, knowledge gaps, and the intersection of crisis and urban governance. And for each of these components of the literature review, she has different parts. So already, I want to highlight what I think is causing you trouble. So when you do a literature review, and especially in the style that you're trying to do it, and really any literature review, you need a sense of direction. You want to imagine this literature review as you're taking your reader, like say, open the door, hop in the car with me, we're going to go through a ride. And I'm going to take you on this ride, and I'm going to show you, okay, I'm just imagining we're in Africa here, right? Okay, here's Soweto, here's the new urban area, here's the savannah over here, here's like this historically interesting place. These were the old geographically detached areas. I'm imagining South Africa now. I really love South Africa. Anyway, I digress. But yes, so you want to imagine you're taking them in the car with you and driving them somewhere. And if you don't have that sense of direction in your literature review, that North Star of where you're trying to go, it's very easy to go off topic and get lost. Right? Even now, I was telling you in a very meta way, I was telling you about South Africa, and I could easily go off and say, oh man, I love biltong in South Africa. No, that's tangential to the point of where I'm trying to take you guys right now. And sometimes I think when you're as a grad student, you're like, oh, this is interesting. That's interesting too. I mean, I sometimes felt like I was a little bit of a kid in a candy store encountering all this amazing information and facts that just blew my mind as a student. I wanted to include everything. So the way you kind of avoid that, which can make it very easy to get lost and stay clear on where you want to head, is to establish that direction. And for the literature review, I like to think of that as making an argument. The literature review is kind of setting the foundation for your project, and where you want to get to at the end of that literature review, ideally, is to identify a gap and roll out the red carpet for what your research is going to be about. Now, I don't know if you've defined your research yet, but basically you kind of can already see now, and that's my destination. That's wherever I start, the reader's getting in the car with me, I need to drive to that point. And that's going to be getting to the gap and what my research is going to do next to get to the next chapter of my thesis. And I can see that you've done this in literature review. You're trying to get to these knowledge gaps, but I don't think you have clarity on what those gaps are yet. And if I look at kind of the direction you're going, even the direction of this outline seems to be going in circles. It's like, well, we're going to bring this stuff in here, we're going to bring this stuff in here, but there's not really this central theme and argument. You have some areas where you're making arguments that maybe you have these neo-colonial critiques of African governance and the way Western scholars have maybe approached thinking about global health governance from a very Western-centric view that may not apply. That's a very relevant argument. All right, there are definitely those who want to decolonize global health. That's a very important argument. But what we need to get to is your unique argument, what you're trying to say in your thesis. And I want that even to keep it, the research is complicated enough. I want you to keep that simple already from your title. So when you say governing African cities, well, think about that. That just explodes up. That can be massive. We need to get that down. So not only do you need a central thesis and a set of in a sense of direction, but we want this to be linear. We now want to think about almost as building up chunks of your argument to get to that point. It's like the stops. I say, okay, I'm not going to drive there all in one go. I'm going to have some stops along the way, and critical stops in the journey. And you need linearity. That linearity, I know some of you think, well, oh, that's so boring to just be so linear in a straight line. Look, start with that linearity. If you want to get fancy and deal with double helix kinds of complicated structures in your writing, that's great, but you need to really master the fundamentals and basics first. So I strongly recommend for every graduate student, keep it simple. The research is complex enough. Be linear. Establish your direction of where you're trying to get to at the end of this chapter and figure out what your stops are going to be and drive. So let me tell you in practice how that might look for you and what I think you're trying to say. And hang on, my pen just dropped. So you see, one thing that's key here is you're talking about governing African cities in the context of epidemics. It's really the first thing that you say. African cities are sites of governance and the terrain on which epidemics are let loose. So what I think is kind of hidden behind here, and reflect about why you're so passionate about this topic, I think you're trying to say that something has gone wrong with the way African cities have governed epidemics. And maybe that's had terrible consequences for the population. You probably see this at a time of COVID, how vaccine uptake rates are so low despite belatedly the availability of those vaccines to the population. And that is linked to maybe a failed history of governing epidemics and problems of the colonial approach and mindset in global health, which persists today. So I think that's a way you can start to construct an argument, right? A simple argument of there's a problem, right? And here are the causes of that problem, and get your gap to say, but there's this whole kind of blind spot in our thinking about this potential set of causes, say on this colonial mindset in global health that really is there, hasn't been addressed. I'm not saying that that's your argument, but for you to have that clarity, right, by taking that kind of problem, and then here's the problem, and now I'm going to do a literature review to get on the different dimensions and layers of the underlying causes, you have a direction where you're taking your reader. And instead, what you got now is you say, okay, African cities are these governance sites and things are happening. And now I'm going to talk about here's what governance is, and here's some critiques about governance. And you see, there's just no kind of underlying point that kind of connects it together. And I think what's going to connect all this is going to be the epidemics. The other thing that I noticed just in your writing, you have tons of jargon. And I would just get rid of this. Vertical health programming. It's just speculative boundaries of governance. Keep this as simple. Or African urbanism. I would keep this much simpler. Foundations of bricolage. Only use those things that are essential. Nothing looks worse that I see as a professor is when students try to use technical words and they maybe use them incorrectly. Again, I'm not saying you've used them incorrectly. It commonly happens. And so it's just a recipe for getting yourself confused. It's like Da Vinci said, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Again, keep this simple. So yeah, that's so my recommendation for you. And this is why I think when you're getting to the end here, uh, you know, when you come down to at the very end, you're supposed to be at your thesis and your questions here at the very end. What about agency and contribution of traditional authorities? What can we learn from the case of COVID in African cities? That kind of needs to turn back and be your starting point. I think you're going to find it easier to write personally. If you're my student, I would say, okay, first let's start off and say, that COVID has exposed huge problems in African cities' governance, and some evidence that that's been an issue. Right? Really frame what is the problem, what is the issue that I'm going to go deeper in, and say that, look, this is, and you might want to put in there somewhere, this is the governance framework I'm going to use, And there are many different governance frameworks. I'm not going to get into that. You don't need to go into a massive review about governance, but just say this is maybe the common approach. And then maybe you want to go into critique about that. But I believe is neo-colonial, and we need to take this alternative view. That would be a place you can put that. And then I would try to get into a summary of what are the governance failures that made COVID so bad in African countries, I don't know, say compared with Latin American or East Asian cities, and go into that. And maybe you want to talk about here. You talk about these, but in very kind of vague terms, specific challenges of urban management and resource-poor settings, sometimes with dystopian visions of governance urbanism. I don't know what those specific challenges are. So try to get more concrete here. The other thing that I really see missing is the lack of a method. And so this is the third point. You need direction, you need linearity, and you need a method. And that method is going to help you set boundaries. So part of that method, I like using the PICO tools in literature review, even if you don't do a systematic review, defining your population, defining kind of what exposure you're looking at or intervention. Here it's going to be, and I'll tell you how this works in a moment. And C is your comparison, which you may or may not find, and O of your outcome, which in this case would be probably signs that governance has failed to manage the epidemic. So try that kind of model. You need some kind of method for your search, and systematic reviews is very clear. And that method is important because you define boundaries. You decide, okay, this is in the scope of my review, this is outside the scope. And so I like the PICO tool. There are other tools other people will recommend, but you need a method, and that method will help you set boundaries so you don't go in circles. So again, just to restate, you need direction. You need that central thesis so you can help drive to where you want to go, ideally laying out the red carpet for your whole thesis. And so I can already see here this endpoint is not very well defined in your mind, and it's very good you didn't start to write. You need to get that clarity. You need linearity then, once you've defined that, to go from the start to the finish. There are different kinds of structures you can employ. I personally like the problem, defining what the problem is, explaining it, giving evidence that it really is a problem, and then going deeper and trying to understand the causes, and then finally turning to identifying a gap. I think that works very well. And then the last thing you need after getting that linearity, you need to, as part of that, have a method to help you establish boundaries of what's in, what's out, so that you don't try to include everything and you don't accidentally find yourself veer topic into something that's just not relevant for where you're trying to go. Hope that really helps. And I can't easily look at comments as we're going through, so I'm going to open this on my phone. I really like what Vern has said here. Boring is also good. Keep it simple, stupid. The KISS model, keep it simple, stupid. 100%. I agree with that so much. Glad you mentioned that. I'm bringing that on the screen. I'm going to stop the share, come back, and take any questions about this. And guys, those of you watching, if you have some suggestions for Sebi in making this argument, what I really like about the community practice is sometimes you can see things that I don't, as I'm trying to present and be live with you, and encourage you to get in touch with Sebi as well. I'm just going to tag Sebi here as we're going. And so those of you who are interested in this topic, we've got a lot of people who work in education, who work in public health, who work in the environment, fields where governance is important. So do encourage those of you interested in governance, especially, get in touch with Sebi and chat. I mean, one of the hardest things I think for students is when they don't have a sense of community, they don't have a sounding board, and they can feel very alone and isolated at times. And so definitely don't want that to happen there to you. So hey Sebi, I just realized you're actually in the studio with us. Hey Sebi, hey.
Hi.
Hey,
How are you?
I had you jump on midstream, and I'm on my travel laptop, so I can only see one thing at a time. Did that make sense?
It does make sense, but the you're looking at the topic from the health side, and I'm actually trying to look at it from the institutional side. But I like what you said about explaining why it's a problem for governance. Would make that much clearer than it is right now.
Well, I think that really is the meat of what you're doing. I think where I had envisioned this, Sebi, and again, this is your baby, so you run with it. Is that the COVID kind of and you could use COVID or other epidemics, revealed that governance was failing. African cities were not governing well. And then trace back, and that's kind of your entry point to saying there's a problem with our governance, to then discuss why is this governance failing so badly? And because you came to the conclusion that you wanted to learn from this case. So it seemed to me you wanted to learn something about governance issues in African cities from these failures. And it might not just be COVID, it might be a series of epidemics or crises that you mentioned. So yeah, it definitely the governance, I think, is definitely the value added
Right.
there. So, and then in terms of reviewing the governance, I like thinking of it in terms, because governance is so vast. I mean, how do you know
Yes.
which elements to pull in? That's why I would. I think you're wanting to make this critique in there, from what I could see, of a colonial mindset and approach in global health, and you might want to decolonize governance approaches.
Or even the colonial approach to governance, right? So everyone is trying to have a city like in Britain, when in fact in African cities there are also traditional authorities that they completely ignore, and so that's why they're failing to deal with the problem.
I think exactly. So, but you see how when you have that, then you get clarity. Here's the problem. And look, all the Western approaches in COVID, for example, tried to use this Britain-style approach, this colonial-style approach, and it didn't work. Why didn't it work? Because, well, they actually have to understand local structures and traditional authorities. And so African cities need to take into account this governance to get better results. But you can see how already, by you having an argument, again, you want to imagine in your mind, I can take somebody who knows nothing about this and lead them all the way through from this problem that you've identified to, well, people think it's this or dealing with this in governance, but actually what they need is that.
Right.
And you see how now we're driving the car somewhere. We have a direction.
No, that your metaphor is very useful.
Okay.
I think instead of driving someone directly to Table Mountain, I've taken them somewhere up to Botswana, where way off the map.
Exactly. It's like, let's go to Lesotho, but you want them to be at the top of Table Mountain. Yeah, I really love it. Guys, if you don't know Table Mountain, it's amazing when you get the clouds rolling and down like the tablecloth and Table Mountain. I digress.
Tablecloth, exactly.
I love South Africa. I think Vern, you're from South Africa. Vern's on the call as well from South Africa. So here we go. We got just a comment here. I think that's a great point. Yeah, this is about crises revealing kind of deeply embedded structures of inequalities in our society and exposing some of the social cleavages and fissures that we have. You're going to get me digressing, because this is an area I'm very passionate about inequalities, those of you who know me well. So, yeah.
I just want to say thanks very much. This was really useful.
So pleased to hear it. Vern's, yeah, fella in the South African mafia here on the call. Yeah, I love the community here. Okay, I'm going to continue, Sebi, if that's all right. I'm going to bring on Sonia. And Sonia, hey, Sonia. So same kind of disclaimer applies. I'm going to be fierce but loving, just as with Sebi, but hopefully in a way that's going to be helpful for you. So yeah, hope that's all right. And Sonia, can you say just a little bit, give us a little bit of context of where you're at the moment?
At the moment, I'm in Macedonia, not the capital Skopje, but my hometown Veles. Currently working on the master thesis at Grad, and that thesis covers the infrastructural investments of European Union in China in Balkan countries, but especially Balkan countries who are not European Union members, because different rules from the European Union applies to the countries that are not members.
Okay. I think this is really interesting, Sonia. And one of the reasons I also thought your proposal would be relevant links to the conversation with Sebi, because you also are covering some governance questions, some questions about power in different parts of the world. So I'm really looking forward to looking at your research proposal. And just to clarify for everybody, the research proposal you shared, this is for, you're looking for PhD positions.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and share screen. I'm going to leave you on here with me. So do interject since I've got you on this time. And again, if you can't see it, yell at me. So here we go. Gonna jump out of here. Okay, let me pull this out so you guys can all now see my very messy desktop. Here we go. So we've got COVID-19 vaccines and the Health Silk Road as a new soft power mechanism in Chinese foreign policy on the Balkans. Okay, so just kind of give you guys the same thing again, kind of a macro view of what Sonia has shared with us. I know it can be hard to see. We've got an introduction here, and then theory and hypothesis. And I'm not sure why Sonia something's gone funky with the font here. Some key research questions, and proposed method, and defining what the contributions are going to be, and some cites to some preliminary literature. Okay, let me step back for a second here. So, okay, with a research proposal, I use a 3F model. I never like using the F model because the F for a lot of students has a connotation like the education system, F fail. No, not like that at all. If you do these things, you're not going to fail. You're going to do really well and you're going to thrive. So the 3 Fs that I want to cover that are really important in any research proposal are fit, feasibility, and fire. And I'm going to come to each of those in turn. So especially, in any proposal where you want to go to an institution to do your research, you've got to construct the argument that this is a good fit. This is something they want to take on board. Right? So if this is an institute that focuses on doing genetics and you want to do stuff on governance, right? It's just a great, fantastic project on governance, not a good fit here. So in any research proposal, especially, even if they don't ask for it directly, that argument needs to be tucked in somewhere that this is a good fit. And I sometimes like doing that, naming names of the faculty. You want to get in touch with them, make sure they really want to take on this project. I've got a student now who's actually very interested in global health diplomacy, and he had a fantastic proposal. And the reason that he struggled to get in some places, he was very focused in this area of global health diplomacy. And a lot of the institutions he was applying public health, they were saying, oh, go to political science. And he was going to political science, they were saying, go to public health. This can be really a challenge. Some of you are doing innovative things that are highly interdisciplinary. And the institutions that provide for PhDs haven't really caught up with the interdisciplinarity, as novel and exciting as it is. So really fit is critical. And what he ended up having to do was do 2 things, was focus on a laser beam to those few people in the world who were very specialized in what he wanted to do and get in touch with them. And also for those institutions, just to hedge his bets and diversify his options, go a little bit broader, perhaps, than he initially wanted, so that he could, his proposal could fit with a lot of the places he was applying. And so that fit is something that currently, as I've looked through here, I don't see written out yet. And I know it's still early days, but basically in all of these, you would want to say, suppose, for example, if you were applying to the University of Bocconi, Bocconi would be, well, Bocconi, just use my university as an example, very specialized in advanced quantitative methods, computational science and training. And this is going to be really this very special expertise that I want there is really a logical fit for this project. I'm not saying that that's what you're going to do. I actually see later on you want to do more qualitative research. So then you would want to make sure and say, okay, right, these qualitative researchers, I'm actually taking up these theories that maybe Joseph and I, you talk about soft power here. Well, find some of the most recent scholars, if any scholars have begun to apply this power lens to Chinese foreign policy and investment. I mean, one area I can think a lot of that has happened has been in Chinese investment into infrastructure in Africa. I know a little bit less about the Balkans specifically. The other thing I want to talk about on the fit. So in my experience, I've done a lot of work on Eastern Europe. And whenever you start getting into niche countries like Turkmenistan, and I hate calling them a niche country, but unfortunately, the bulk of the dominant scientific discussion is still very Western-centric, for better and for worse. When you narrow this down to the Balkans, you are limiting the people who might be interested in it. Right? So many people might look at it and say, "Oh, this is Balkans. This is a kind of an These are Eastern European specialists. This is not me." So that's not necessarily a limitation, but you really have to define, why is this case study of what is this thing about the Balkans going to tell us? Why is this such an important case study that's going to give us insight into something that's more relevant to this bigger conversation of power China and here COVID-19 vaccines. So that's another thing in this proposal here that really need up front. So we haven't really said a whole lot about why the Balkans. So that really needs to be there. If you do really want to go down that path of focusing on a narrow area, just justify why. So that's really fit. And I really encourage you, as you shop around this proposal, and I would think of this, Sonia, as you're going to shop around this proposal to find somebody who's super excited and say, you know what, Sonia, what you're doing here is right on the money. This is exactly what I love doing. You need to make sure you've got that, because the most important thing you're going to have in your PhD is having a mentor, not just a supervisor, but someone who's going to invest time and energy into helping you grow in your career. And fit is absolutely indispensable. Okay, second thing. And the big thing, the second F, is going to be, and Sonia, I'll come back to you at the end here, and we can talk each of these through. So is feasibility. So you also want to prove to them that you've got a thought out plan and you can do it. You have the necessary skills, because a PhD is such a short timeline to get your research done. It's going to be hard if you don't have the skills already in some firms to pick them up, that you'll be able to do it. So here, for example, feasibility, you might need, for example, you're really looking at Chinese foreign policy, they might think you need to know Chinese. Now, if you do know Chinese, that's great. You need to say that. That's very important, especially because later on I can see here your methods, you want to do a qualitative analysis, and you're going to do some semi-structured interviews. They're probably going to want to know that you know Chinese. If not, big limitation, I'm going to say, wait, well, the student doesn't know Chinese, is not going to be able to learn Chinese in this limited window of time, out. I remember I wanted to do, I was applying to the US National Science Foundation for a research fellowship, and I scored very high on a lot of marks, but I was looking at mortality crisis in Eastern Europe, and they said, well, this student doesn't know Russian. And that was perceived as a big weakness in my proposal, and ultimately that was the weakness that got that proposal killed back when I was applying for some graduate student funding way back in the dark ages. So yeah, if you know it, highlight that front and center, because that's key on feasibility. If you don't, you really need to explain why that is not going to be a threat to your project. The other thing that's going to be important too is going to be that you have the contacts to actually execute this, because you're proposing here, I'm going to do this with official representatives from ministries. How are you going to get in touch with those representatives from ministries? I mean, they're busy people. It's not easy. I mean, if I wanted to go reach these people, I don't know if they're going to have time for me. Before, when I was at professor at Cambridge, we could get letters written from very, very prominent people back then at Cambridge, and that was sometimes open doors. But this also needs to be something thought out. Again, this is a threat to the feasibility that you can actually do what you say you're going to do. And you want to come across to your professors as very thoughtful, and that you've considered these potential risks to you actually being able to implement and execute on the project you propose here. So yeah, definitely you want to convince them that you can do what you say you're going to do. And I sometimes even like putting a timeline. I know that's going a little bit far, but it doesn't hurt to put in a Gantt chart. A Gantt chart is just kind of a chart that just shows for each month I'm going to do this task and plan out. That can all change, but it just shows that level of attention to detail that you have that can put you a step above the rest. The last thing I want to say here is that this needs to be a hot topic. You're going to connect to more if people can immediately see, yeah, this is important. I get it. This project needs to be done. And most of you are interested in things because I found in this community, you want to make a difference. And so when I went to look at your questions, you had here questions like, how much was China present in Hungary, Serbia, and Turkey before the pandemic of COVID, and in what forms? This is very, very exploratory. It's less linked to this big debate on soft power. And you see this paper, I'm confident you can answer these questions, Sonia, no doubt about that. But I'm not confident that a lot of people are going to get excited about the answer to this question. So I really want you to focus your questions on something that somebody in this community can look at and see, like, that's a really burning, important question we need an answer to. You're just going to do a whole lot better in getting funding. You're going to do a whole lot better in getting published. And I would say ultimately 90% of your success as a grad student and beyond is going to come from getting these questions right. So here, the same thing here too. Has the Chinese presence increased after the vaccine and medical aid donations or not? And I'm not sure what you want to say. I think maybe in saying, has China exploited this crisis to crack open the door into these to penetrate these markets they couldn't get into otherwise? I don't really know. But the two questions you're proposing here, this one isn't really that strong, and this one I think could be maybe stronger. And it's not really clear because you've made so much about power in this theory, why that's going to be, how you're going to take that up. That's not really connected then to your methodology. Other thing I'm just going to say on this discussion of power, there are many theories of power. It looks like you haven't done a fully thorough review on power, so I would really strongly recommend that. Fleshing out that little review more. For example, say I like Luke's, who writes about 3 faces of power. There are many different theories of power. You would want to justify, if you want to use this theory, why, and connect that theory to the research you're actually proposing to do. So I know there's a lot here. I haven't, and we could get into some direct edits into the topic, such as each paragraph kind of needs to make one point, and some of this is smushing a lot together. But I think, Sonia, for you, it's going to be most helpful to get that macro view of the project in place. So get that fit, that feasibility in that fire, and it's really going to take this proposal from being good to opening a lot of doors for you. Yeah, so Sonia, you're with us. Does that make sense?
Yes, everything makes sense. I have a question regarding the methodology, and I already posted when I sent it, the proposal in the message. Can I change? Is the topic enough interesting for you so we can change the methodology from qualitative to quantitative?
Well, I think the bigger question is, so the way I think about methods is, what's the appropriate method to answer my research question? And that is really not always, it could be, I mean, that's where we draw, personally in our research team, we draw on quantitative, we draw on qualitative, a range of methods, because it really depends. Those methods have different payoffs. They can tell you different things. So I would really focus on getting those burning questions right. What
Mhm.
And I really enjoy, for me, one of the best ways to find research questions is something that you're angry about, something that you think is unfair or unjust. That's been my personal way of answering your research question, because it's really indispensable that you're super passionate about your topic, because it's going to get very hard. You're going to hit so many hurdles along the way. You've got to have that fire for it. And so can you tell me a little bit more about why you're so excited about this area?
Because as I mentioned, one of the pillars from the Belt and Road Initiative is also the Health Silk Road. And I have faced, my country was one of the first ones who received the Chinese donations. No, so first was in vaccines. So first was the Serbia, and following up was from China, and after that Macedonia received vaccines from the COVAX system. So in the line, first was Serbia, and second one was China in the donations to the country. So, and also in the mentioned countries, the case studies most present from the eastern part, and especially the countries where I can find acceptable data at Hungary, Serbia, and Turkey. Because also the eastern countries more accepted the Chinese donations and helped during the
Okay,
pandemic than the western countries.
sorry, okay, but let me understand. So, okay, there's data, and these donations happen, but are these donations a good thing, a bad thing? Are we happy about them, concerned about them? I'm not really sure. What, why are you? I want to know why you're so passionate about that.
We were happy because nobody was counting us as a live country. Somebody existed that they needed vaccines in the very, very burning moment. So that's why I'm using those, not only the vaccine donations, but also in the investments in the health systems from China as a tool measuring how to measure this tool of soft power from the Chinese side. How
But
much
okay,
they.
but let me think. This kind of links to the conversation with Sebi of direction again. Let me frame it a different way. What would you like to show? What would you like your research to? Right. For example, if I'm working on a drug for diabetes, I know at the end of that research, if I found a drug that cures diabetes, I've done a fantastic thing. what would be kind of for you in a similar way? What would be a good result from your research? What would you like to show?
To like to show that their approach of using the vaccine donations and the investments in the health system has increased their presence and supported in the better access of the citizens to the health system care.
Okay, so that's good, that's really helpful, and so I think what's really nice now. There's been this literature, and I'm tapping into my background knowledge here. And what you really want is to be having conversations with some potential supervisors who can help refine your question. There's been a lot of discussion, say, concerns, for example, and this links to Sebi's conversation earlier, that Western approaches in Africa to health have really not delivered the goods, haven't gotten really good results for a range of problems. And some are saying, well, is the Chinese approach better, or is it just more of the same as the West? And that's a bigger question. I'm not saying that that's your question here, but one question you just said is China made donations. Did this, was this beneficial? Did this have benefits to the public? But I still don't think you're tapping into, from what I can hear, I don't see a big debate here. I don't see sites in the literature, big debate and discussion. I'm thinking about Vern on the topic. Vern's topic was, hey, all these people are saying these dolphins are dying because of fisheries. But in reality, I think the dolphins are dying because of pollutants. I want to see that kind of debate going on here. Um, I'm going to take a couple of comments here. And so I really want to encourage you, Sony, to find that debate and discussion, because that's going to make things higher value added. So I added some criteria to look at qualitative research, which is, yep, these are all fair points. You definitely want to justify, right, why you're taking the approach you're taking. And Sonia, I'll write up some notes and send this to you afterwards.
Okay.
And another comment here, the decision following gay people. So I'm not 100% sure I follow this this comment, but there are discussions too in the general aid literature about when a donation is coming to a recipient, how well is that donation calibrated to the actual needs of the recipients, and how much are they actually, instead, as you're saying, an element of soft power that they want to crack open a market or achieve some other goal. China has another goal. It's not just their own goodwill for giving these vaccines. They want something else. So Sonia, really, so think really hard about these three F's. I want to see the fit, apply, and make that specific and explicit in every draft. I want the feasibility spelled out, that you've got the skills to do this, a plan, and you've got the contacts, especially if you're doing interviews, and justify why you're taking a qualitative approach. And fire on that hot topic, I want to make sure it's really that the passion's coming through in discussion there, that everybody can see, right? One exercise I have my students do is, even for themselves, score 1 out of 10. How important is this topic right now? And get your score to be higher on that scale. And ask other people if we ask people in the group, hey, how important is Sonia's topic on a scale of 1 to 10? I want you to be above a 7. It's not a hard and fast rule. It's just, if you can get above a 7 on that, you're making your life so much easier. I really think that's as a graduate student, it's the safer play. It's the safer way to go, and it's just going to get you a lot more success on your proposal. So again, Sonia, thanks so much for sharing this with us and being willing to expose yourself. I know I'm fierce and critical, but I hope you'll find this constructive and can help you taking it forward to making a good proposal even stronger.
Thank you for your time. You were very constructive.
Awesome. And yeah, Sonia, I'll come back to you with some more direct written feedback where in the document on these points. And exactly here, Graham just comes in. The West is mourning about China taking over the world. Yeah, and that's really, you can see there are some important debates there with China into that people will say, like, well, this is really quite important. So thanks for mentioning that, Graham, coming in there. So guys, if you are writing a literature review or you're working on a research proposal, let us know in the comments. Really like to hear if you're on Team Read. Let us know as well in the comments, and I come back and take your questions. Again, these sessions are Grad Clinic. This is your time to get feedback on your papers, having a professor in your corner, myself here in this case, who's been there, done it all many times over, and I'll tell you the hard, honest, unfiltered truth. And you may have to take a step back, but it will help you take 2 steps forward ultimately in the long run. If you guys do want to send, remember, I'm open those questions. Just send to me by email, send me a DM, and I can't always promise I'll get to everyone, but I do like to take the ones that I think are going to be instructive and help a lot of people in the community. Use that 3F model on proposals and a literature review. Remember have direction and find your structure. Try to achieve linearity in writing up, and have a method to help you set boundaries. Guys, really good session today. I think that is a good stopping point. Sonia, Sebi, big thanks again. I'm going to be in touch directly in the DMs with both of them, and I will look forward to seeing all of you again, same place, same time, next Friday. Have a great weekend, everybody.